Greetings to all participants around the world. I am Britt, Ajvazi, Product Marketing Manager for GRC at PECB International. Thank you for taking some time off your busy schedules to participate in this webinar on creating information GRC management systems by integrating various ISO standards and the industry best practices, brought to you by PECB. Today's presenter is Mr. Arno Kapteyn, a management consultant and trainer who helps organizations design, implement, and run management systems for the information technology domain. So before Mr. Kapteyn continues to elaborate further on his professional background and to begin the session, I would like to ask those who have questions to please write them in the chat box in the control panel, and Mr. Kapteyn would be glad to respond to them at the end. Without further ado, I give you Mr. Arno Kapteyn. Mr. Kapteyn, you can begin. Mr. Kapteyn, you can begin.
Yes, I'm sorry. There seemed to be slight technical difficulty. The system muted me for some reason or another. Okay, thank you, everybody. My name is Arno Kapteyn, and I will be your host or presenter for today's session. 1 second. Yes, which actually is concerned with creating information governance, risk, and compliance management systems. The subtitle reads, by integrating various ISO standards and industry best practices. Now, first of all, in the context of all this, what is a management system? A management system is basically the system used by management to keep control and exercise their management responsibilities over the organization. Now, so in this context, same as with most ISO standards, we would not think about specifically an IT system. It is the cooperation integration of various people, processes, IT, technology, and such. Okay, as mentioned, my name is Arno Kapteyn. Primarily, I am a management consultant and a trainer. I work with various organizations and primarily in organizing their information domain. So governance of information, management of information, security of information, information risk management, all such topics tend to be on the list of the requests asked of me. And most of those assignments revolve around having various stakeholders that have different requirements for control or management exercise over an organization or a part thereof. And when we start talking about this management system, the first thing that we need to think about is the scope. And we can think about, for instance, the topic of this management system might be the IT department or the information technology domain, either inside of the organization or outside of the organization. But we might also be looking at all information. Now, the difference between the two being the non-digital information, for instance. Quite often, if I look at organizations that are looking into information security, information risk management, they will automatically work towards managing the risk associated with information, but they limit themselves quite often to the digital information, which basically leaves a huge blank area, which is very important. So before really starting to think about what it is that we need to, that we want to do, is to set the scope of what are we looking at. Are we looking at, for instance, a GRC management system just for information technology, information in its broader form, but also all impacts that might be there on non-digital information, but also the way information is handled in the business domain, or we might even go beyond that and look at the complete governance, risk, and compliance of the business processes. Now, information in that instance is just one of the basic resources used by business processes. If we're looking at a financial institute, for instance, information is very important, but we're now also would be looking at alternative forms of operational control on the activities of, for instance, humans and the correct working of the process itself, not just around the information used by the process, by the business process. And we can even extend that even further to look at the complete organization and the complete governance, risk, compliance requirements and the integration of those requirements. This is basically what we would call then enterprise risk, enterprise GRC. If and when we look at the scope, it is very important to realize that by limiting the scope, we are not creating a standalone system. We are just focusing on a sub-part of the overall integrated management system for the organization. So in all cases, we always need to look at where, if and when we are just looking at a subset of all control, risk, or governance requirements, how does what we are doing fit in with the bigger picture? So there, setting the scope, looking at what's beyond the scope, how the interaction is the first question that we really need to sit down and discuss. Once we have this set up, the next question then becomes, okay, who has which requirements? So what are the stakeholders for our scope? For instance, if we're looking at governance, risk, and compliance of information, right, who are the stakeholders? And stakeholders might be internally, externally, it might be government. As government, we quite often end up looking at regulatory compliance, for instance. Now, regulatory compliance is basically the laws generated by a organizational stakeholder, in this case the government, and then translating their requirements into something that one must do, i.e. a law. So again, looking at regulatory compliance, first thing is, it is all about a standard set of requirements that can be connected to an identified stakeholder. If and when we want to start looking at an integrated government risk compliance system, the first thing we need to do is identify all the relevant stakeholders. And then once we have those stakeholders, we also need to identify what it actually is that they want us to do. Right, so which controls do they want to see us implement, and how? Quite often it is very important that, for instance, with regulatory compliance, not only do they want to see us implement control, but they also want us to actually prove to them that these are operational. The assurance of what the organization is actually doing. Now, assurance requirements from one stakeholder to the next might be quite different. For instance, if one of the stakeholders should happen to be the New York Stock Exchange in the form of compliance with the SOX law, the SOX law and regulations is all about the information shared by an organization towards the stakeholders, and it is relevant for an organization that is listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So if the organization has a listing on the New York Stock Exchange, then automatically SOX compliance becomes an issue. Now, if and when we decide that SOX compliance is an integrated part of the management system that we're trying to build, then first of all, what is it actually that we need to look at in the nature of SOX? For instance, what is the scope of SOX? Well, basically, SOX says that all information that might be presented in a formal way towards the stakeholders and owners of the organization is subject to the SOX law. All underpinning information that must ensure the integrity, i.e. that ensures that actual truth is being reported to the stakeholders, or is also part of that SOX law. Please bear with me; it's a bit of short to really decide on that, to describe this the scope like that. An expert might have some discussion with it, but it is important to realize that the SOX law does not apply to all information just like that. All right, there is a subset. So if we identify the stakeholder, if we identify what his requirements are, also those requirements that he might have regarding us proving that we are in control of what we're supposed to be, right? We can also say, okay, we might decide that the rigidity of what he's asking in the way of proving it, and why do I use the SOX? The SOX, for instance, has got very strict assurance requirements on sample-based testing, which are very, very important, or at least very harsh and very time-intense. There's auditing requirements, sample-based testing requirements, which for other stakeholders might not be that relevant. So you might want to look at an integrated governance risk compliance system, but not also the governance risk compliance section, but also the way that you want to assure the complete system. You might decide that the assurance regime for certain subsections of the system have to be higher than for other parts. Those part of the governance, the GRC system that are concerned with SOX relevant information or SOX relevant might require more work in assurance than others. So here again, also on the side of assurance, we can see where we can differentiate but also integrate, right? If we do this very intense testing of the information that we have under control, and thereby meet the assurance requirements for SOX, we can reuse the outcome of that testing to show to other stakeholders that we're actually doing the job as well. It might be over the top for the other ones, but that's okay, right? Better to show that you're even more in control than he really demands than to try and redo it time and time again. So to read all the stakeholders and all of their requirements, and then come up with a complete set of what is asked, which sections of the topic that we're trying to work with. That is a very important set. Now, the picture as shown on this slide kind of identifies that different stakeholders might have different requirements, and some of them will mix quite easily. Others might be completely contradictory. In this case, this is basically a one-on-one meeting to work with the specific stakeholders to identify how they can basically be brought on par so that all stakeholders are satisfied with the outcome. This is why it's very important for each set of requirements also to have a stakeholder that you can address to discuss what and to clarify if and when required. All right. So stakeholders and requirements. It is too easy just to say, okay, we need to make the requirements of SOX legislation. But if we don't have somebody in control or in charge that can tell us if the proposals that we are creating are good enough or not, then it's going to be very hard to really discuss the fine-tuning of the complete system, and to make sure that we are efficient and effective without overdoing it in some cases. Yeah. Now, once we have all of these requirements and the stakeholders, it is important to identify that, and this is basically adopted from the CobiT approach. It is important that, for instance, for any asset information, you need to balance. All right, benefit realization. If I look at those assets that I'm trying to control, how important are they for the organization? Right? What benefits are they? Is the organization able to realize by using that resource? what are the risks associated to that topic. Now, if something is utterly important, if certain bits of information are very utterly important for the correct functioning of the organization, but the risks associated with that resources are especially high as well, then we might decide that we need to add additional resources so that the risks and the action are matched. On the other hand, we might find that there are certain resources that are really, yes, they do add some value to the organization, but the risks associated are such that we really don't want to work with it. And since they're not very beneficial, we do not want to spend excess resources to really mitigate the risks. Right, so this triangle of things, the balance of the three, benefits associated with the use of whatever it is we're trying to control, and the risk associated with it, and then decide how much resources we want to implement and use in risk mitigation, or actually to make it possible to actually realize those benefits. Remember, right, I might have some bit of information that might be highly beneficial if used by members of the organization. Now, if I keep it in the vault, then the risk is minimal. But those who could potentially create benefits for the organization by its use can't get at it, so therefore the potential to realize benefit is not optimized. Again, this triangle of the three is what it's all about, right? Just limiting and controlling everything till the end and minimizing risk on everything does normally end up limiting the ability of the organization to actually use this, to use the information to its benefit. Well, we see discussions like this quite often. Is, for instance, these days, use of tablets in many organizations is a big point for discussion. On the one side, the business says, well, if I can get at my relevant information via a tablet, then I would be able to go mobile, do all kinds of additional beneficial things for the organization. But quite often, security says, yeah, but tablets technically are not very secure. So therefore, if I start using using tablets to handle my highly important information, that might have risk involved that I'm just unwilling to accept. Again, by looking at both sides of all sides of this triangle, then and only then can we expect to really optimize, get the best out of things. Okay. Now, if and when we start looking at building so now we decided, now what is it that we really want to manage via our GRC management system? We set the scope. We looked at the stakeholders for the system. We looked at their requirements. We looked at the relevance of those requirements and balanced them. So now, eventually, this should give us a complete set of everything that we want to really manage via the management system. But now, quite often, what you will find is that people will immediately look at a management system. Okay, let's go and implement control, or let's look at the process and security of the process thereof. Now, processes and, for instance, indeed the technology are things that we can influence, where we can change things that might have an impact on the GRC, on the level of governance, risk, and compliance control of the organization. But there might be more ways of addressing, of looking at aspects of the organization that might bring us to our conclusion that much easier. So if we just look at processes or implementing controls, then we might be looking, we might take the hard route where something else might achieve results quite much faster. Again, adopted from CobiT, they say, well, there's basically 7 groupings of organizational aspects that you might think about changing to achieve your goals. And CobiT calls these the enablers. Now, if we look at, for instance, the start in the middle, the frameworks, the principles, policies, procedure, guidelines, these are the formal documentation of the management system, basically. Yes, this is what they describe what's supposed to be done. They set the rules and the laws for the complete system. Yeah? The second thing is that we can have, indeed, as mentioned before, look at the processes and the work instruction. These are much more, and these could either be the business processes, the IT processes. And this is actually what happens on a day-to-day basis. What we can also have a look at is the organizational structures. Do we have the right divisions? Do we have the right, for instance, do the right levels of management have the right mandates or control aspects? Is to actually get a complete system that is in balance. Quite often what you will see, and this is one that keeps popping up, the aspect of the organizational culture. I've been working with organizations where, for instance, every time and time again, if they found that it wasn't working, they would go back and try and improve the maturity and the description of the processes time and time again, right? If a control fails, you go back, you look at your framework, you look at your documentation, see if it's written correctly, and then try and enforce that by reiterating on the process time and again. Yet in this particular organization, it was part of the organization culture to basically ignore everything written on paper and do as felt natural, because you were the guy who knew, you were the guy on the work floor that knew his job best. So you can now, in a case like that, you can reissue new work instructions or write new policies. But if there's a habit of not following policies and not even reading them, then this is not something that will improve the situation one way or another. Easy or not, right, you will need to, in this particular case, we needed to address the culture. The documentation and the process descriptions and the process designs were fine. It was just that they were being ignored. Those type of examples, really standing back and looking at the organization, will help you to identify which of these aspects of the organization are left wanting and will give you the solution, i.e. the level of the 9 out of 10, the increased level of control for governance risk compliant purposes. Right? Now, below the line, there's the basic resource that you might be looking at. For instance, information. You know, is the information, the nature of the information, is it correct? Is the supply of information, is there good interaction between those who supply information and those who use information? Are they talking to one another? Are people who are getting the information at the right time, in the right order, and is it useful? All those type of questions. Now, just looking at the interaction of people. Another one is services, infrastructure, applications, and templates. Basically, this is the box that we would call technology. Is the underpinning infrastructure, technology that we're using, and this is technology in the broadest sense, is that effective? That's also why I added templates, for instance, in this box. And technology quite often is about the format of the information that you're using, or the format. Is it presented in a logical way, in an understandable way? Yes. And indeed, the last box is indeed about people. Human resources. Do I have enough people? Do they have the right knowledge? Do they have the right skills, the right competence? But also, is there, and this is the crossover between the one box and the other, right? The people that I have, do they show the right cultural and ethical and behavioral values that I set up and as part of the other box up there? So the interaction between these boxes is also very important. The reason to show this picture is to basically try and make the point, if all you have is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail, right? If all you understand about your organization is process, then process improvement is all people will end up doing. Yet there is so much more in an organization that the enablers of that organization that you might change that will get you to your solution that much faster. So you need to broaden up, right? You know what it is that you want to do, i.e. who has the requirements, and how they want them, who wants what out of the organization, right? And now you need to resculpture that organization to actually meet those requirements. And in resculpturing that organization, process is just one of the aspects that you might be looking at. Think wide and think about different aspects that might get you there. Each of these boxes in its own right will open up a complete different line of thinking, which might involve different types of knowledge or experience from those helping you, i.e. the management consultant. For instance, people that concern themselves with getting the right people with the right skills and the right competences tend to be different consultants or different experts, subject matter experts, than the ones that concern themselves with the processes and work instructions, etc., etc. Okay, so by thinking wide, you might also identify that you might need a different type of skill set in your program of project. Now, if and when we decided what it is that we might want to be looking at, then the next step is, okay, what has been written in the field, what's out there in prior learnings, in standards, and in organizations that did the field work. Now, these are just a very small selection of all the standards and the organizations that actually present good practices, advice, standardizations that might help you in achieving your goals. And all of these, I can put up many more. And now we need to start identifying, okay, which of these standards are we actually willing to adopt? What is it that we want to do? CobiT, for instance, is indeed the framework created by the ISACA, which originally was the interest, the worldwide operating group of IT auditors. These days, they also represent information management consultants and management consultants, and information governance and IT governance interests. But ISACA as an organization is very focused on information and related technology. Right? ISACA in CobiT is just one of the models and the best practice that they have. ITIL might be a well-known one that is all about an operational process framework and service management framework to organize your information technology domain. Open Group, the owner of TOGAF, which is also on there. Open Group is basically, then we're looking at enterprise architecture. Quite often understanding the nature of your organization, understanding how the different pieces work together, business processes, the information used by them, where is this information actually kept in the IT systems, etc., etc. That knowledge by itself is something that you utterly require. So quite often, the first thing is to get a good overview of what is it that I actually have in the organization. Now, many more are here. If you, for instance, look at the SAI, they are the CMMI owner. All of this COSO, might be, this is more on the business side. Now, all of them come with very relevant support, but you need to make a decision. And in deciding, you can adopt them all, but then you will end up with an overwhelming amount of supporting information that is partially contradictory, or that might be also doubling up a lot of the times. to be able to make your decisions on which standard, which work and frameworks to adopt, it is a good thing to the organization behind this. And by the way, I didn't even mention ISO, which is, of course, one of the main providers of a huge list of standards and best practices, actually, and standardization on a variation of topics. Right? I don't know how well aware you are. Almost everybody these days knows about the ISO 9000 standard for quality management, but there's standards on like the ISO 38500, which is concerned of the governance of enterprise IT, ISO 20000, which is about service management, 27000 information security, business continuity, etc., etc., etc. There's a multitude of them. Management might be the records management. There are standards about a lot of them. Now, first of all, if you understand which topic you put on in the start, which aspects of your GRC system you found most important, i.e. setting the scope. We're focusing, for instance, on the records and the governance, risk, and compliance of records information. If you have that scope information, and if you have a clear view of the stakeholders and what type of information they find relevant, or which part of the organization they want to see, find most important to exercise control over, then that will also help you to find the most relevant standards to assist you in crafting the answer. Again, here you need to really balance out how many standards and best practices you're going to bring in and what you're going to be using to keep it manageable. When doing that, it is very important to understand that most of these best practices all lean on a set of common concepts, right? The concept of continuous improvement. If you've read, for instance, 3 or 4 ISO standards, you will notice that continuous improvement is always in the books, right? Capability maturity. Almost all those models basically adopt the idea of capabilities maturity in one form or another. And underlying meaning. Okay, so yeah, there is a difference. I can have a process design. 2 organizations can have design of processes for one and the same purpose, but that doesn't mean that both those processes are identical. The one might be that much better in design, in the definitions, and the way that is being handled in the organization. I.e., the better you are with the implementation and the continuous improvement, then the higher you would rate the capabilities, or the capability maturity. If we then look at, for instance, terminology like a risk-based approach, almost all of these standards and all of these methodologies say adopt a risk-based approach. Don't overspend managing risks that are minor in nature. Business impact assessment. All establishing how important whatever it is that you're trying to do actually is for the organization. i.e., this is partially about the benefits that you can organize for the organization. RASI, responsibility, accountability, consultant, and informed. This is about the roles of various people and how their input is being rated for certain steps and activities in the organization. Again, if we take this slide and compare it with the last one, which basically listed a number of standards and frameworks, you will note that many different frameworks and standards adopt exactly the same policies. If you look at various ISO standards for various topics, for instance, ISO 27001 for information security management, the ISO 27005 or the ISO 31000 for risk management or informational risk management. And if you look at the basic concepts, i.e., they all say the same. Make sure that you got people, that you ensure ownership thinking. People should both own the topics of what you're thinking about, but also the solutions, right? Make sure that the right people have got a clear view of what it is that they are. Are they responsible? Are they accountable? Should they be involved, or are they just informed based on things? The whole PDCA cycle, plan, do, check, act, and also known as the Deming cycle. Almost all of these industry best practice adopt the PDCA cycle in one form or another. So there is not that much difference, right? If you're really looking at on that level for the very standards, by adopting the concepts, you might adopt the best thing of all of these best practices. 9 out of 10, I do not believe that a best practice, right, is intended to be used as part of the letter of the law. You have to remember, they are the best practices. Various people from various organizations came up with solutions that work for them, which means that they might work for you as well. But no two organizations are alike. So what might work for your neighbor might not work for you. It is still good to have a look at his solution, because if you find that it is useful, it might save you bundle by not you will. But it is not automatically so that everything that is good for your neighbor is also good for you. So you need to keep thinking, and do not, and normally I never advocate to really use frameworks and standards as books of law. Take the concept, take the thinking behind it, and then make that work for your own organization. Okay? Now, if you start doing things like this, and I've been doing this for a number of assignments with various organizations, these type of solutions in one form or another. I worked with one of the major oil companies trying to graft an integrated IT operating model, which basically covered both their processes, and they wanted a standardized IT operating model for all their IT shops worldwide. This was actually a multinational working indeed with a presence on all continents. And the first thing that we learned is that all of these continents are different. All the ways of working in different countries are different. So how much do you want to dictate in a standardized business in a way of working from the centralized organization, and how much fit for purpose do you want to allow the individual shop that might be far away, that might be working for different on a different continent with a different culture? That kind of trade-off is something that you need to think about already, right? So if you set the scope too big and designing too much detail, you might stifle the organization, because the solution that might look good in the head office might not work at all in the field somewhere on the other side of the planet. Yeah. This is very, very, that trade-off is something that you need to set from the beginning and manage throughout your project. If you notice that you're going overboard, that you're stifling or becoming too rigid in what you're telling people to do, then you might want to leave that. If you have the expertise on the work on the ground, sometimes you need to trust the people that are out there, that they know best, that if they tell you that this will not work in their environment, then quite often the answer I would advocate is okay. But as long as you understand what it is that we're trying to meet, if you get another solution that will make us achieve the same goal, the goal is non-negotiable, right? i.e. the control objective, what it is we're trying to, that stands. That is because that is what my stakeholder requires. The way that you achieve that goal, the way that you actually implement the controls and the response to make that control objective, then there might be some way of, or some leeway to change that, to make it fit for purpose to the individual organization. Again, very much about creativity and working with the nature of the individual organization from the one to the other. Now, another very important pitfall is if you bypass an important stakeholder at the beginning, then that's hard. So especially in the beginning, ensuring that you have all the important stakeholders on board, know their requirements, is very important, because if later on somebody else steps up and says, yeah, hold on, but I had something to say about this and I want you to do this, then quite often you will still end up having to duplicate your effort or basically redo a lot of it or change a lot of it. That is, and then you end up still spending a lot of additional money. Stakeholders with irreconcilable requirements, simple things like, for instance, think broad. The owners of the organization might go for profit maximization. But if you consider that environmental groups might also be a stakeholder to your organization, they might figure that certain activities that might bring huge profit are not very environmentally friendly. So you still need to come up with a solution that, yeah, is either partially or at least satisfies your stakeholder. That can really be a lot of political negotiations to come up with a final set of overall requirements that meets everybody's, all the stakeholders' wishes. Even when you then go down into actually adopting parts of various frameworks, be very aware that there might be small differences from one model to the next. And if you take a subject matter expert, for instance, an ITIL expert, and put them in the same room as a CobiT expert, you need to be aware that the definition of, for instance, something like IT problem management and IT incident management has got slight variations from one model to the other. And if and when they start talking without being aware of these differences, you can end up with huge discussions that are basically have no merit whatsoever. It's just about definitions. I've been there. So quite often, the first thing to do is to set the definitions. Take control of your own definitions. Agreed, there's a lot of people out in the world, and they might have this definition of risk management, that definition for that terminology. But within this organization, this is the way that we use it. Quite recently, what we now noticed, to give you an example, fundamentally, there's two basic definitions of risk. One is to assess risk, or to define risk as an uncertainty with a potential negative impact on your ability to make outcome, and that is basically the one mostly adopted or used by, for instance, the ISO 27005 standard. But the ISO 31000 standard basically says, risk is just an unknown impact or an unknown circumstance that has an impact on your ability to meet the goals. So now, opportunities, i.e., positive things that really heighten your ability to make your goals, are also part of risk management. You need to be aware of the difference. Right? Information security people, information risk people tend to go for the negative only. I limit the risks, the risk with negative impact, but the risks with positive impact, so the opportunities to actually improve the benefits, are normally not picked up by your information security community. That's not within their realm. Or that's not the way that they treat risk. Whereas ISO 31000 says, yeah, well, but risk can be both positive and negative. Now, if you identify that there's a difference, that's no good, no bad, it's just different. If you then decide that you want to go for risk, the definition with a negative impact only, then you're leaving something called opportunity management, right? Something or somebody you might want to have somebody who tries to identify activities that might positively have an impact, i.e., the opportunities that create. Because then your risk people don't address the risk, the positive thing. as long as you understand that that's there, right? If you really look at those definitions and step back and set them up and make them formal so that everybody is working from the same music sheet, then you can really have a good integrated system where everybody understands the same thing, but talking the same language is the first step. Yeah? So again, differences of definitions from one model to the next. Tunnel visions when designing the solution. If you only have a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. I don't know if anybody in the audience ever tried to hammer a screw into a plank. Well, the answer is don't, right? To really fix a screw, something using a screw, you need a screwdriver. Understanding the difference of a screwdriver and a hammer, and thereby being able to make the selection. What is it that I should be working at? Now, does it really is, once again, describing process and really improving the process description actually going to resolve my issue? Or is it more about ensuring that people actually read that which has already been written and start working accordingly? i.e., do I need to improve the culture of the organization in working with these process descriptions, actually following the rules? All right? If you just look, if you have tunnel vision, then you might not see the opportunity that's right before them. Trying to achieve perfection in the first round. Now, the idea of continuous improvement, right, is that it will come the second time around, right? The one good thing about continuous improvement, it doesn't have to be perfect on the first go. Just as long as you ensure that it is better than you have today, put it into action, right? So now these long-lasting projects that really stretch out forever before anything goes in operation, that is not what we're trying to do anymore. If I have improved controls, then implement them and bring a higher level of control, i.e., meeting the requirements into operation. Now, the next turnaround, i.e., next year or whatever, I might pick up the next layer and going and improve there and then. So take the organization by the hand, take it step by step. Right? As long as you keep, as long as improvement on the status quo, why wait to implement it? Right? Just take it small steps at a go. I've seen design efforts where people spend years designing the perfect operating model, and basically, yes, it was brilliant work. But in the meantime, the organization was left wanting for way too long. Just taking an intermediate step and getting some level of control, not the final goal, but something, would have proved much more valuable. Now, what is it that we can get out of this integrated approach? Because that is what we keep trying about, right? Quite often, why would you? I see that there is this one project to do with business continuity, right? Which is about risk management. Another one is about information security risk management, or service management improvements, and all of these might be running side by side. But at the end of the day, they're all concerned with the same basic topic, and they're all concerned about increasing the way that management can exercise control over their organization in one form or another. Now, instead of redoing time and time, if you basically, first of all, say, okay, what are all the requirements, standardize those, and then start looking at your answer, then you might have a much more effective and efficient solution that meet more requirements, right? So you limit the duplication of effort by reuse of deliverables. If you do a business impact assessment to decide which processes and resources are most important for your business continuity, 9 out of 10, the output of that business impact assessment is reusable for your risk management as well. The nature of a business impact assessment is exactly the same for these two purposes. Too often I see that people keep redoing their BRs for different types of projects. That's a waste of resources there and then. Alignment of solutions for various attention areas without gray areas. Again, right, one BR. I've seen business impact assessments, one for business continuity, the other one for risk management purposes, and the outcomes were contradictory, or there were gray areas in between, do it once and really make sure that you meet the requirements for both of these user communities. Common language and definitions used by SMEs for different areas. The guy who's really focused on business continuity understands the language used by your enterprise risk manager or some other focus area because they have a common language. Yeah? Standardization of layout, content, and quality of deliverables. For instance, if you, again, let's stay with the example of business continuity and document and records management and information security. All of these require the creation of documentations and standards and policies specifically. Too often I see that various processes and projects created policies, and if I put them back to back, right, the content, the layout, the way that they're managed is completely different from one to the next. How can I trust the value of that policy if I do not ensure a certain level of standardization? Right? Too often I find that policies are left and right. Policy is not just about creating the policy, it is also about implementing it and making sure continuously that people that are new to the organizations are aware of its existence, that everybody's aware of updates and things like that. Policy management is a skill in its own right. If you do that for one type of policy, the security policy or the risk policy or any of these formal documentation, the way that you do that is should be the same for all of them. Then and only then can you really rely on a consistent way of policy management and thus trust that they actually achieve their goals. Yeah? Improved service, clearly identified service providers serve customers. The example that I gave for the BIA, if you, for instance, consider the business impact assessment to be a service to be supplied by a certain subject matter expert, the outcome of that business impact assessment could be used both by the project for business continuity and the project for risk management. So now you got two service customers, two different projects or different special interest groups that can use the same service provided by one service provider. If that service provider then really communicates with all of its customers to get its requirements correct, now you can really start making some use so that you create outcomes of business impact assessments both in format and content that actually work well, give those that need it the answers that the information that they need to do their job right. Creating information or creating services without understanding who actually uses them and why they use them is a big waste of effort. Because if you don't understand what people are going to do with that which you create, how can you ensure that you're doing it in a way that actually makes most sense? Okay? Bottom line, that would mean a consistency in overall control over the organization, alignment of requirements, and a consistent way of proving to various stakeholders that you heard their requirements, that you understand their requirements, and which answers you build in response to their requirements. So whatever the controls in your are actually at the end of the day implemented in the organization can be to whoever asks for it. All right? So no controls just because it makes good sense. No, there is somebody for good reasons that wants you to meet certain objectives, and therefore if you ask people to do stuff that might be limiting, it is in the nature of control that it will limit people in the freedom to do as they please. Now, if you ask people to limit their way of operating and to conform, quite often it is very good to make them understand why it actually is that you're asking them. Okay? Now, that's basically my story. Of course, this is a high-level overview. There's much more to this. If and when you would be interested to spend some more time or would like to discuss any of this with me, this is my LinkedIn. This will also give you a bit of a background information of who I am and what I stand for. At this point, I will answer any questions. I've got one question here. Which methodology do you most prefer when implementing software engineering projects? Waterfall or Scrum Agile? Okay. It depends on the organization. It's that simple. Right? If the nature of the organization is that they want to work with that they really want to force and build projects where they have a absolute tick box list of all the requirements to meet, then you might want to stick with waterfall. These days it is all the customer, and I adopt this, right? Scrum Agile is much more about making small steps. If you hear me talking about don't try and reach perfection in the first go, but make improvements and then go then go in the next round. Now those are things that align with the whole concept of Scrum and Agile perfectly. So in general, I would go for Scrum and Agile more than for Waterfall. But certain organizations would really, for whatever reason, want to nail their requirements to the wall, especially if you outsource, if you ask a third-party supplier to really build your project. Remember, right, the tendency of additional requirement or changes to sneak into the project is one of the major reasons why projects tend to go overboard. So one of the reasons to limit that might be to really say, okay, it might not be perfect, but these are the requirements, period. No changes in the middle. Okay, I hope that helps. Otherwise, please drop me an email. Okay, what does SME, sorry, SME in my context stands for subject matter expert. Right, in any project, in any change things, there's those people that normally actually manage the change of things, and there is those who really use their expertise. Right, the subject matter expert. So, for instance, if I have a business continuity management implementation project, there is the project manager or those person or the role in charge of managing the complete project. But somebody with a good knowledge of business impact assessment, right, might be the subject matter expert on how to exercise set up business impact assessment. So that's the SME in my context. Hopefully that helps. Is this implemented? End-to-end, actually, I do this with all of my organizations that I work with. End-to-end, one management system that covers everything? No. It is more about an attitude. Right? Normally, I will walk into the organization, and then we will sit down. Okay, what are the topics of your interest? 9 out of 10, my scope tends to be about information. Right? To give you an example, I was working with a Middle Eastern country, and they said, well, you know, what we want to do is we want to improve information management, and we want you to focus on the topic of records management, information security, information governance, knowledge management. So these type of keywords, right, but all of these are all aspects and special topics of this thing called information management. So we came up with one information system, which standardized, for instance, the way that we were handling policies, the content thereof, but also, you know, to identify the stakeholders, their requirements for these policies, for the topics, and the whole implementation and the management thereof. So yeah, all of these basic concepts we just brought together and used in this context. Are there open source based GRC solutions available? Now, please be aware, right? If I hear a question like this, that sounds like you are looking at a GRC solution as being an IT system, right? I'm not talking about IT system. As I said, these different aspects, you might notice that the box in the resources that said technology was just a minor issue, right? Normally, I don't particularly care about the IT systems that are under there. That is just a small aspect. to get the mentality right, to get the processes right, and then get the underpinning systems. The most used, more or less open source GRC solutions, half the time to 3/4 of the time where you start is basically doing it on an Excel spreadsheet. Now that's about as open source as you can get. Right? Granted, Excel is still paid for by Microsoft, but the IT underpinning there, right, starts on the back of a cigar box half the time. That's not what it's about. Having and of course, systems like BWise or any other enterprise description or GRC tools, there's brilliant systems out there these days that will help you, but normally it starts off much smaller. Get your policies right. Before you start really looking at automating stuff, make sure that people have the right set of policies and that you're setting the right lines. Right? Make sure that the right people are assigned the right processes. Then, and the right activities take place. Then, only then can you start thinking about automating and supporting the effort by automation. Does that help? Now, granted, right, some of these organizations that I work with in their GRC tooling, they got brilliant systems that really, especially if you look at the National Oil Company, they wanted to register and manage their business and IT controls from one system. Now, that was one huge system. And they also used it to monitor and log the assurance and indeed commit the outcome of the testing effort. That was, in their case, a custom-made system. Again, right? Open source, yes, there's nothing wrong with it. Custom built or off the shelf, that is not really the topic of this particular discussion, right? Look at what it is that you actually want to achieve first, and what the nature of the organization is. Now, certain organizations tend to lean towards shrink wrap versus custom built. That's a cultural thing, all right? Just follow what you encounter. Okay? Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Kapteyn, for answering the questions. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to write us an email, and Mr. Kapteyn would be glad to answer them and respond to you individually by email. So thank you, Mr. Kapteyn, for your informative presentation, and the audience for your attention and participation throughout the webinar. In addition, we would appreciate if you would spare a few minutes to take a short survey that would pop up after the webinar ends for any feedback you may have regarding the session. Please also check our website and other communication channels for news updates on our upcoming webinars, and please note that GRC webinars will take place every Wednesday. Thank you again, and I look forward to your participation in upcoming webinar sessions.